What would you think if I told you that I'm a train conductor, and sometimes we stop at train stations that don't exist? Most folks don't give my job a second thought. You sit down, I punch your ticket, then you're off at the next stop, right? Easy peasy. Except when it's not. See, there are stations we stop at sometimes that, as far as any map or government document is concerned, don't exist. It all started a few years back on a night like any other. We were heading north, cutting a straight line through a pitch-black expanse of country. I was doing my usual rounds, making sure everyone had their tickets punched. That's when I noticed it. The hum of the engine felt different, softer somehow. The train began to slow, the calm countryside outside my window replaced by a platform, brightly lit and utterly out of place in the isolated stretch of nowhere we were supposed to be cutting through. "The hell?" I muttered to myself. I hurried to the cockpit to see what was going on. The driver, an old salt named Frank, was as surprised as I was. "This ain't on the schedule," he grumbled, eyeing the pristine platform nervously. "Not supposed to be any stops for another 100 miles. We both looked at each other, and I could see the same question in his eyes that was on my mind. Do we stop or not? In the end, it was the sight of a lone figure standing on the platform that made up our minds. Passenger or not, we had to at least check. The train came to a stop with a low hiss, the doors sliding open automatically. I stepped onto the platform, the cold biting through my uniform. The figure was a woman wrapped in a heavy coat. Her eyes met mine, filled with a gratitude I didn't understand. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she was on the train, disappearing into one of the carriages. I climbed back on board, the doors closing behind me. The train hummed back to life and we were off, leaving the strange platform and the empty countryside behind. I went to find the woman, intending to punch her ticket, but she was nowhere to be found. From then on, those strange stations became a regular occurrence. They'd appear out of nowhere, always a single figure waiting. Always they'd say the same thing, "Thank you." Then they'd vanish before I could find them again. We never saw the same person twice. Each time I'd try and note the location, but it was no good. They didn't exist on any map, and when I'd check the onboard GPS, it would show us as being miles from any sort of civilization. It was like these stations existed in a different reality, only intersecting with our own when we passed through. I tried talking about it with the others, but no one else seemed to notice anything out of the ordinary. I thought I was going crazy until one day another conductor, Jane, pulled me aside. "You've seen them too, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low. When I nodded, she let out a sigh of relief. "Thank God. Thought I was losing my mind." We became a sort of team after that, keeping a lookout for the stations, trying to figure out what they were. The best theory we had was that they were some sort of ghost stations, filled with spirits trying to find their way home. One night we arrived at another station, this one a grungy concrete platform that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The figure waiting was a man, dressed in a soldier's uniform, his face young and weary. "Thank you," he said, just like the others. But unlike the others, when he boarded the train, he didn't disappear. I followed him down the aisle, finding him staring out the window as the train began to move again. The forgotten station faded into the night, swallowed up by the darkness. "Do you know where you're going?" I asked, breaking the silence. He turned to me, a sad smile on his lips. "Home," he said simply. "I just want to go home." His words hung heavy in the air, filled with an aching sadness I couldn't begin to comprehend. It was Jane who thought to ask the question we'd never considered. Do you know you're dead?" she asked, her voice gentle. The man looked at her, his smile never wavering. "I think I've always known," he admitted. "But knowing and accepting are two different things, aren't they?" We didn't know what to say to that. We simply sat with him, the three of us lost in our own thoughts as the train sped on through the night. After a while he stood up, looking at us with grateful eyes. "I think this is my stop," he said, even though we were nowhere near a station. He moved towards the door, his hand hovering over the release button. "Thank you," he said, looking at us one last time. Then he was gone, stepping off the moving train into the night. We rushed to the window, but there was no sign of him, just the empty tracks disappearing into the darkness. We thought the soldier would be the last passenger from those phantom stations. But we were wrong. The train kept finding these spectral stops. Sometimes weeks would pass without incident, sometimes only days. But they kept appearing. The next passenger we picked up was a woman in a long, outdated dress, clutching a small suitcase tightly. She was crying when she boarded the train, thanking us profusely through her tears. Like the others, she disappeared before we could find her again. That was a trend we were starting to notice. No one would ever stay long. It felt like each passenger was stuck in their own world, unable to interact with ours for more than fleeting moments. They seemed trapped between realities, each station a doorway, our train the vessel to move them on. It was heartbreaking, but in a strange way, it also felt profoundly important, like we were part of something much larger than ourselves. Months passed, and the train picked up dozens of these spectral passengers. A man in a miner's outfit, his face smudged with coal. A girl no older than 15 in a flapper dress. A soldier from a different era than our previous passenger, his uniform blue and his hat carrying the mark of the Union Army. Each one boarded, thanked us, and then vanished without a trace. The eeriest encounter was with a child, a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10. He climbed aboard wearing clothes that had seen better days, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Thank you," he whispered, staring at us with those scared eyes before disappearing into one of the carriages. We tried to follow him, to comfort him, but like the others, he was gone before we could reach him. That one stayed with me for a while, the echo of his frightened voice haunting my dreams. Despite the melancholic nature of these encounters, we knew we were helping these lost souls. Yet we couldn't shake off a creeping sense of unease, a feeling that something was coming, something we weren't prepared for. We were right to be worried. It happened on a frigid winter's night. The phantom station that appeared was different, bigger, and more elaborate than any we had seen before. It was a grand building of stone and glass, its lights flickering ominously. And the figure waiting was not one, but a group, a crowd of spectral figures all waiting to board our train. The train squealed to a halt, brakes hissing against the chilling air of the winter night. Jane and I exchanged a glance. We'd never seen so many at one station before. A crowd of spectral figures stood waiting, their faces obscured by the shadowy flicker of the platform lights. One by one, they filed onto the train, each echoing that familiar "thank you" as they passed. Unlike the previous times, these apparitions didn't disappear immediately. They took seats, filling the usually quiet late-night carriages with an eerie sort of bustle. Some looked at us with weary smiles, others with hollow sadness. But they all shared one thing, a sense of relief. Jane and I moved through the carriages, providing what comfort we could. We found that some would respond, telling us snippets of their stories. Others simply stared out the windows at the passing darkness, lost in their thoughts. A woman in a full cap and gown whispered to us about her lost love. A jazz musician with a phantom saxophone hummed tunes from a time long gone. A blacksmith, his ghostly figure covered in polish, merely nodded and asked if we were going up. Hours passed like minutes, and as the sun began to peek over the horizon, the passengers began to vanish. As if the first light of dawn was a signal, they stood, giving us one last thankful nod, and disappeared. Some left with smiles, others with peaceful resignation, but they all left. By the time the sun had fully risen, the train was empty again, save for me, Jane, and a few early morning commuters who had just boarded, oblivious to the spectral journey we had embarked on. After that night, the phantom stations appeared less frequently. A few more spectral passengers came and went, each one a poignant reminder of the strange purpose our train had served. But gradually they stopped appearing altogether. Jane and I still talk about those eerie nights, still wonder about each soul we helped along their journey. We still don't know why our train was chosen, why we were chosen, but we're grateful. Grateful to have been a part of their stories, however briefly. Grateful for the quiet thank yous and fleeting smiles. These days our shifts pass without spectral interruptions, the tracks leading us only to the living. But every time the train slows unexpectedly, every time an unscheduled stop appears on the horizon, I can't help but look out the window and wonder, are we there yet? Is this another phantom station? Another lost soul needing our help? And even if no station appears, I find myself whispering into the cold wind rushing by. You're welcome. Safe travels. After all, you never know who might be listening.